Has anyone ever been to a wedding where someone actually objected? And if so, how did that go? Story 1. I feel like about half of weddings these days don't have that part, and not because of feared objections, just because it's outdated and weird. Premarital sex is a thing. Divorce is a thing. Weddings cost like over $10,000. If you know reasons to stop a marriage outside of movies, you need to intervene at the engagement or earlier, not during the ceremony. That said, one of my wife's college roommates canceled a wedding like a day or two beforehand right after graduating college, after being in a long-distance relationship with some guy for a year or so. Her family was quite well off, and she was dating a guy who lavished gifts and expensive dates on her whenever they were together. Said he ran his own company, just bought a fancy house, etc. It turns out he was just super in debt, working a near minimum wage job and maxing out credit cards taken out fraudulently. He had a fake webpage with other employees for his company that he set up for the sole purpose of keeping up the front. The house was only bought from grossly lying about income, pre-2007 housing crisis, on the mortgage application, and he was drowning in debt. The almost bride's father got bad vibes about the guy. A few things didn't add up, like he had this fancy house but couldn't afford any furniture. And he hired a PI who quickly uncovered the deception. And she didn't break up because he wasn't rich. She broke up because he spent tons of effort to lie about everything and was completely conning her and just trying to get her roped into joint ownership of his debt via marriage that he expected the family to pay off. Story 2. Half of my family, my dad's side, are East Coast WASPs. We're talking tweed jackets, prep schools, taking a brandy in the study, riding lessons, the whole kit and caboodle. The other half of my family, my mom's side, are East Texas hillbillies. I have an uncle who's gotten a DUI while riding a four-wheeler in 2 separate incidents. I have a cousin who is currently in prison because he tried to rob the tropical fish store where he worked. They arrested him when he tried to come in for his next shift. I went to a wedding of a cousin of mine from the hillbilly side once. First off, I never knew the whole "does anyone object to this union" thing was real. I thought that was shit they only do on TV. Anyways, when the preacher asked that, the bride's mother made some noise and then excused herself, leaving the ceremony. She didn't say yes or anything, but she definitely made a weird noise at a super inopportune time and then stood up and walked out. My aunt, the groom's mom, took that as a sign of disrespect and left to confront her. Yes, you heard that right. In the middle of her son's wedding vows, she decided to leave to go confront the bride's mother for making a noise. I'm not proud of these people. The ceremony ends, and the bride and groom are being ushered out of the church and into a limo to take them to the reception. And out in the parking lot, my aunt and the bride's mother are locked up like 2 wrestlers. Then I hear someone shout, "Oh, come on, y'all just quit it." And I turn around to see my uncle and the bride's father are now fighting in the foyer of the church, and the fucking preacher is trying to break them up. To the surprise of abso-fucking-lutely no one, that marriage lasted 2 whole years. This some ho-down hootenanny hijinks right here. Story 3. This was in America, and the wedding was in a Buddhist temple. Parents of the groom stood up and objected because they didn't believe the bride was of the same class. They spoke in another language, so most of the English-speaking guests didn't know they were objecting. My husband was the best man, and those closest to the couple knew this might happen. The Buddhist priest said he would handle it if the parents tried anything. After the parents spoke for a while, the priest said to the groom, "You've heard what your parents had to say. What do you want to do?" The groom replied, "I want to marry my bride." So the priest asked the parents to leave. At this point, the rest of the guests are cluing in that this was not a nice part of the ceremony and that the parents were actually objecting. So, as the parents walked out, some of the guests were berating them, saying things like, "You should be ashamed of yourself, and how could you do that?" And even though the groom was not happy with his parents, that was very hard for him to hear. That was 30 years ago. The couple is still married. They have 2 beautiful, successful children. After the groom's mom passed away, the groom's father came around and was involved in their lives until he died. Wow, that is fucked. I'm very impressed that they are obviously happily married and that they decided to allow the father into their lives. Story 4. Not at a wedding, but at a funeral someone objected to the death. At my uncle's funeral, his ex-wife and a local church, cult, leader tried to raise him from the dead. We were all sitting there like normal people at a normal funeral, and she walks up to the casket and starts yelling, "James Lester, raise up." I didn't know she was there, or I would have prepared myself for shenanigans. Also, I didn't know my uncle's middle name was Lester, so please imagine the confusion. So she and the cult leader are literally yelling at my uncle's body. Not surprisingly, my uncle refused to resurrect himself. They were escorted out. I've actually never told this story because it makes my family look insane. Story 5. My husband's first marriage. The brother of the bride stood up and said, "Say no, you can still be happy." They went through with the marriage and wound up divorcing with a messy breakup. Brother-in-law is still best friends with my husband. As far as he's concerned, he gained a brother and lost his sister and is better off for it. And he never lets him forget the fact that he was right and he should have bailed. Story 6. I worked a wedding where one of the moms objected, but I think the groom knew that the parent was going to say something, so they just responded with, "Oh, sit down. We knew you didn't like this a year ago and clearly we're not going to change our minds today." The wedding continued like nothing happened, but the mom was low-key shunned and people avoided her at the reception. Story 7. A woman, in her late 20s at the time, objected to her mom marrying my uncle, so she started yelling, "Mom, don't marry him!" during the ceremony. The ceremony proceeded and some family on the mom's side led the daughter away to quit interrupting. I don't blame her. My uncle was a lying, lazy bastard. The marriage didn't last. Story 8. At his rehearsal dinner, a co-worker's mother's toast included that his soon-to-be wife was a damn dirty whore who wasn't good enough for her son. Folks are not happy. Video ended, so I didn't see the whole thing. At the wedding, which I attended, his mom started to say something at the speak now part, but was silenced by her daughter. Mom left and didn't see the rest of the ceremony. Everything about that poor guy was drama. I feel like a common theme here is it's always the mother of the groom. Story 9. I don't know if it's a UK thing or even just a one specific church thing, but I was told by the priest in a rehearsal that if someone objects, even as a joke, the priest is required to pause the ceremony and talk to the objector alone to discuss their concerns and decide if they have a valid objection. Like it's not a fun, jokey moment, it's a legal part of the ceremony. He also said it used to be a custom that if you raised an invalid objection, you then had to pay for the wedding. Story 10. I had a friend who was a minister, and the subject came up if he asked the question during ceremonies he officiated. He laughed and said no way. He basically tells the couple not to include it because it only invites a moment of anxiety at best, misery at worst. His best story, and one of the reasons he stopped including the question, was a couple where the lead up to the wedding, the couple was obviously in love. The bride was very smiley and happy. Day of the wedding, she's stone-faced. He knows something is up because he's never seen her like this and he asks if she's okay. "I'm fine." Right before the service, he asks again, "I'm fine." He gets to the question, "Does anyone object to this union?" The bride reaches over, grabs the maid of honor, shoves her into the bride spot and says, "You're screwing him, you marry him," and then stormed out of the church. Story 11. Not quite the question is asked, but too funny to not share. Priest. Any objections? Father of the bride. Lets out the hardest, loudest, most complex sounding sneeze I've ever heard in my life, completely with involuntary saying, "Achoo!" Mother of the bride, hammered on champagne. For fuck's sake, Jerry. It took a good 5 minutes for everyone to regain their composure. Story 12. A relative visited one ceremony where it was asked if anyone objects, and the groom decided it's a good time for a joke and said, "I do." The lady who was going to marry the couple just turned and left. They had to go through all the paperwork again and change the date. Got married, divorced in like 3 years if I remember correctly. Story 13. I was at a small ceremony indoors. Maybe 30 people stopped listening. When the minister asked for any objections, a picture of the bride's dead grandmother that was hanging on the wall fell to the ground with a loud thump. We looked at each other, but the minister finished anyway. Divorced within a year. Story 14. Kind of. My uncle was getting married. Small, just a handful of family and a minister. I was videotaping. My grandmother was not into it. At all. With each line spoken by the minister, she had a cutting, sarcastic response. I could not believe it. It was so unlike her. When that part came up, she said, "I object, but does it really matter? They're going to do it anyway." The minister just ignored her and proceeded, business as usual. They were divorced within a year. Wish I had a copy. Story 15. Oldie but a goodie. This happened back in the 70s. This was shared to me by the guy who married my parents. It went something like this. Does anyone object to this union? I do. That's my husband. So they paused the wedding. The bride, groom, and the woman objecting went into a small room. The woman who objected provided documentation showing the groom was still legally her husband. Apparently, the couple had started divorce proceedings sometime earlier but never finished. The wedding was canceled and everyone sent home. Story 16. I used to make wedding videos. Did one at an outdoor wedding spot high on one side of a valley. It had rained earlier in the day, but the storms had cleared and the wedding could continue. During the vows, I don't touch the camera. Just step back and let it run. So I'm spaced out waiting for the vows to finish and notice a radio tower far across the valley. Suddenly, lightning hits the radio tower. I had enough time to think, boy, when the thunder gets here, it'll probably be loud. I also had enough time to clue in that the minister was saying, if anyone objects to this union, let him speak now or forever. Kablam! Total silence in the venue. Preacher takes a second to look around and make sure everybody is all right. No one has been smote. Well, that's never happened before. As far as I know, they're still married. That was 10 years ago or more. Story 17. Not a wedding I attended, but my best friend went to her aunt's wedding. Aunt's future, toxic, mother-in-law whips out proof from Ancestry that they're actually first cousins. Wedding was canceled, and the bride and groom haven't spoken since. Story 18. This will sound absolutely stupid, but when I was a kid, my deeply religious aunt had her wedding at a local church. During the objecting part, lightning struck very near the church. I remember to this day how the following thunder was so loud that the fancy windows of the church started rattling. Well, the timing of the strike was very unfortunate for my uncle because my aunt took this as a sign of God objecting to her marriage and called the wedding off on the spot. Needless to say, they married on the same day a year later, and this time without objection from God. They are still married to this day. Story 19. I wasn't there, so this is a secondhand story, and took place shortly after the wedding, at the reception. No one could find the groom until they found him out in the limo having sex with one of the bridesmaids. The bride went back into the reception, stopped the band, took the microphone, and told everyone there what just happened, naming the bridesmaid, and said the wedding would be annulled and all gifts would be returned. She totally took charge of the situation, but damn. Story 20. The mom of one of the bridesmaids got up and yelled, "Yeah, I object. You fucking stole him from her," while pointing at the bride. I've known the groom for a long time, and by proxy, the bride. I am still very good friends with them. I have never seen her more interested than at that moment. The bridesmaid got up from her chair and was like, "I'm so sorry. Let me get her out of here." The bridesmaid and the bride's stepfather escorted the woman out of the wedding, and it continued. Story 21. Was maid of honor to my BFF. One of the groomsmen thought it would be funny to raise an objection. He didn't understand that, by law, all proceedings had to be stopped and investigated, meaning the officiant had to take time aside to question him. He had the audacity to keep the joke going until the officiant said that he would not continue and the wedding would be called off. Both sets of parents and multiple guests also had to be questioned to confirm the objection was uncalled for. It took over an hour. The wedding scheduled after was set back 30 minutes. Their guests started arriving while all this was going on. It was a huge mess. Dude thought it was hilarious. I clocked him with my fancy dyed special for the day shoe the minute the shortened photo shoot was over. He was asked to not attend the reception. Bride and groom feared for his safety after I whacked him. They dropped him as a friend immediately. They will celebrate their 30th anniversary this June. Also note, this situation began the new tradition in my family of using Quaker self-uniting, available in Pennsylvania, marriage licenses, and having a loved one officiate at the ceremony. It basically means that the couple is married the moment they and their witnesses sign and mail their license to the municipality. They are already married when the ceremony takes place. The question of an objection is not part of the ceremony. Story 22. Not exactly an objection, but the wedding was on a boat. No one could leave, and the groom was Jewish and married a Mexican Catholic woman. The groom neglected to tell his family it was a full Catholic wedding, and the groom's family stood up and pitched a fit when they realized the groom was going to take communion. The uncle, who sponsored his bar mitzvah, stood up and announced that the groom was a disgrace to the family and walked downstairs. The reception was a shit show. Story 23. I was at one. Didn't know what happened as I was in the back. The bride runs out to the limo with her family after her. I said to the person next to me, "Cold feet?" She's like, "Oh no, I thought this might happen. Her ex is here." We went outside. He'd apparently come into a lot of money. He came to the side door in front of the church and said he objected because he's rich and wants her back. She paused too long for the groom's liking and he said, "F you both." She ran. Last I saw, they were in the limo with her. She was crying. Have no idea how it ended, but there was no wedding. We went to the reception without a bridal party. We ate, drank, danced, and left. Story 24. I went to a Catholic wedding where, when the priest asked this question, one of the groomsmen did a very loud, long throat clearing, which got everyone laughing. Everyone except for the bride's elderly Italian grandmother, who marched out of her seat and angrily hit the groomsman with her handbag and shouted at him in Italian. Story 25. One of my cousins is married to literally one of the kindest and coolest dudes I have ever met. Before the wedding, her little sister was saying how she's marrying my best friend. At the wedding, when the priest asks if anyone objects, the room is dead quiet, and all you hear is a little girlish whisper, "I do." It was honestly really adorable, and we all laughed, and my cousin's husband and her little sister are still best friends. Story 26. I used to work at a fancy stately home as a waitress. Most of my shifts were weddings. This guy's objection was a bit untimely, but what happened after was even better. So the actual wedding happened at a church nearby, and they had the reception with us. This guy rocks up after the actual ceremony to declare his undying love for the bride and tells the groom and the entire wedding party that he'd been sleeping with the bride. Cue tears and drama, blah blah blah. He's obviously chucked out of the wedding. Turns out he'd gotten an invite for the evening only and thought he was coming to object at the actual ceremony. The groom forgave the bride. He was a total wet lettuce. And they're both crying and hugging outside. The party carried on, and all was great, until someone overheard the chief bridesmaid talking to her friend about the fact that she had also been sleeping with the bride. This prompted grandmother of the groom, about 75 years old, to punch the bride in the face. Groom apparently forgave the bride again as they went home together. I'm guessing he knew she was a hoe bag, so wasn't really that surprised. As I'm here, I'll give you another one. Same place, literally weeks after the first wedding. We have a wedding where the groom's family are clearly loaded and full of their own self-importance. Especially the groom's mother, who gave us hell in the preparations. Nothing was good enough, kept changing how she wanted things, talking to us like scum, and making it very clear her family are a better class of people than the bride's family, who were pretty nice and down to earth. Anyway, halfway through the ceremony, someone's handbag goes missing. The groom's mother stormed into the kitchen, demanding that the manager search all our bags and saying she was calling the police on us thieving scumbags. Manager tells her, more politely than I would have, to calm down and not make assumptions. He has the security search the place. They go into the men's toilets and can see a guy standing in the stall with his back against the door. I guess they could see his feet. He refuses to come out initially, but eventually he does. He had 2 women's handbags in there that he had been walking into. He was also off his head on coke. The guy was the groom's brother, son of a bitch lady who accused us all of stealing. Her face when she found out was amazing, and she picked herself up and left straight away. Police came and the guy was arrested. Story 27. The wedding was at the bride's house. They had thought out almost every detail, except one. When the officiant got to the speak now or forever hold your peace part, the cuckoo clock expressed his opinion. Cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. It was a full 15 minutes before the ceremony could continue without everyone bursting out laughing. Story 28. Well, sort of. It was staged, prearranged, and the minister was warned ahead of time. The couple said they wanted to make the ceremony more interesting, so they had a friend object, declaring his love for the bride in an over-the-top dramatic speech. The best man, my husband, stabbed the guy with a stage dagger. He died, and 2 of the other groomsmen dragged his limp body away. The wedding proceeded. I have to say, it was pretty awesome. The bride and groom are still happily married 30-plus years later.